committee meeting so that we can start on time and end on time. That is what I love to preach. So that's what we're here. So I'll call this meeting to order at 4 o'clock. Do we have any amendments to the agenda? I would like to add under recruitment and retention of minority educators, possible presentation, well, just conversation with Tanya Coates regarding the upcoming budget if she is here. So can I get a motion for that?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, we will add that to under recruitment when Tanya Coates comes here. Any announcements that we have? I will like to let the community know that Daniel is not with us at the moment, but he might come on Zoom around 4:30. So just FYI, we are missing one of the school board representative, Daniel, but due to an emergency, but he might come on at 4:30 via Zoom. Any other announcements? Welcome back from spring break. Awesome. Well, let's get rocking and rolling. Can we go ahead and have our budget update, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rocking and rolling, I could have done the moonwalk up here.
We'll take it.
I'm not.
You can when you exit, do the.
I'm not capable of it. So I can be really brief here. Sales tax revenue, and I actually spoke with audit committee yesterday, and even county commission on maybe on some of this, but sales tax continues to just far exceed expectations. It has every month of the fiscal year. It is doing far better than what economists were predicting this time a year ago. And as you remember, during the budget development process then, which is the current year budget we're under, we kind of just scrapped everything when COVID hit and started from scratch. And so we budgeted very conservatively, still not as conservatively as what some economists were predicting, but we kind of crossed our fingers and went with it. Well, so far, right now, based on 7 data points, based on July through January, we are forecasting over a $20 million surplus in sales tax collections. That has held up every single month. So we're continuing to hope and pray that this trend will continue. The trend will need to continue in order for that to happen, but through 7 months, it's continued to happen. So that will serve us, well, let me just say this. That equates to about a 16% surplus over budgeted estimates. What's even more striking is sales tax at this time of year is running at about 8% more than this time last year, which is before, which is before COVID hit. COVID kind of hit, and then so kind of in March. So we have data points through January. So sales tax just continues to be really strong, and so we're hoping that continues. That will serve us well for 2 reasons. One, it would significantly bolster our fund balance reserves going into next year. Secondly, it will serve us well as we are operating under the assumption these trends will continue, and it serves us well going into as we develop next year's budget because we're starting with a much higher base than what we would otherwise. The one area that we're a bit concerned about, we're not panicked, but we are concerned is with BEP, simply because we don't know what those numbers will look like. We won't know until April, and then it's not even official because the state sends estimates in April, May, June, your final number in July, which means that every single year we are developing a budget without knowing what our BEP is going to be. And at a $240 million, that's a lot of money to not know what it's going to be. Fortunately, our budget department has done an excellent job over the years in getting very close to what those estimates are based on trend information, based on our proportional share of dollars typically we receive from the state. So they look at a couple of factors and they get it really close. This year, though, is such an extraordinarily different year that makes us a little nervous. But again, I wouldn't say that we're we're in a panic mode or anything. There's a hold harmless provision that's working its way through the legislature. Our board has reached out to our legislative delegation and stressing the urgency to maintain those hold harmless provisions as they work through the legislature. Superintendent Thomas is in Nashville. He's attending several meetings over the last day or so. And he's kind of cornered some of these finance folks down at the state. And based on what we're hearing, continue to hear, we're a bit encouraged. And, they say misery loves company. Well, we have experienced about a 3.5%, maybe a little bit more, 3.678, whatever, percent decrease in ADM. That's average daily membership, fancy word for enrollment. And as you know, the BEP is heavily driven by our ADMs. So when we were down 3.5% or more, it's like, geez, what's this going to look like for us? What Bob has been able to get information from the state is that the state is experiencing on average a 3.3% decrease in enrollment. And so the reason that's good news for us is because intuitively it would lead us to believe that our proportion of BEP dollars will remain pretty close to what they have been. So it's not like the rest of the state is maintained their student population and theirs is decreased. Everybody's decreased. So everybody's kind of still on the same kind of level playing field. So that was encouraging. Plus the state is increasing BEP to increase the instructional salary component 4%. That does not mean that would be a 4% increase, that it would provide a 4% increase to all of our employees. It typically kind of comes out to about a 2% increase, right, for our employees. I can tell you that in our budget proposal, well, it's not a full proposal yet, but we're looking at the numbers. We're pretty encouraged, absent of anything catastrophic with BEP, that, we're going to continue to really press in to try to make that happen. We don't know until the final revenue numbers come in. I can tell you that the superintendent, that's always at the top of his list. That's always a priority. So based on preliminary information that we're hearing from the state, we remain encouraged. But BEP is still kind of a wild card, and so we're keeping our eyes on that. I will say for sure that the federal dollars, the stimulus dollars, have been extremely and will be extremely beneficial for us. We have used ESSER 1.0. You remember that's the first round. It's about $13 million. We use that primarily for the first phase of our one-to-one initiative to try to put a new device into the hands of every student. That's going to be a multi-year rollout. But that would take care of phase one, and then we also were able to fund or reimburse some personnel costs that with virtual learning that we had back in the spring. So that helped tremendously. So ESSER 2.0, which is what was it, the board approved the acceptance of those funds. It's now on the agenda for county commission. I spoke to that yesterday. That's about $50.8 million. And that is going for a host of things. I'm going to tell you that a large chunk of that is going for virtual learning and for phase two of our Chromebook initiative. And so these are items, while these do not, so in other words, we can't use these funds to just close budget gaps, right? So we can't say, okay, we've got a budget gap here in the general purpose budget. Let's take these funds and just drop them in general purpose and we're balanced, right? The feds won't let us do that because federal dollars are used to supplement, not supplant, which means it's an add-on, which means that these are initiatives or costs that we incur as a result of COVID. So what we will be able to do is to reimburse some of the unbudgeted COVID costs for this year with related, especially with related to virtual learning. It will also help us in the subsequent year to fund the virtual learning initiatives. And I don't think virtual learning is going away. I think as the pandemic continues to, continues to, the urgency continues to lessen, I suspect that virtual learning will look differently. I don't know that it'll ever go away. But, so ESSER 2.0 is very much needed as well, because that allows us to keep initiatives out, those costs out of the general purpose budget. So it doesn't directly help the general purpose budget, but it definitely indirectly helps it, because these are initiatives otherwise that we would have to get in there. All right, ESSER 3.0 is a whopping $114 million. And it looks like we're going to have till about 2024, September of 2024, which would be the 2025 budget to spend those. I suspect, we're still awaiting guidance, I suspect it'll be for similar things. So what that actually does is that gets us further down the road to be able to do these initiatives that otherwise the general purpose would have to pick up. It also allows us to, over the next several years, it buys us a lot of time to come up with some strategic financial structuring so that we can be prepared when those dollars do leave. We can be better prepared on how we're going to deal with that. So anyway, for this budget, upcoming budget, again, we're very encouraged because of the revenue estimates and how they're coming in, and how we're leveraging the federal dollars as well. So anyway, that's we're going to meet with the board next month, and that's when the proposal will come into focus. And anyway, that's kind of where we are with budget. But we're I think it's safe to say we're very encouraged right now.
Thank you so much. Any questions that we have? I do have a quick question. Are you seeing any, because all this extra money is coming in, are you hearing any, are you seeing any, hearing any conversation of people at the state level indicating that BEP, not to push BEP to be fully funded because of all this extra money? Like, what is the conversation that's being had?
No, that's a great question. We've kind of heard the chatter that could potentially be a problem. I'm not really seeing that actually play out right now. I will tell you, that was a concern, because the fear was that, oh geez, school districts across the state are getting all this money. That means they don't need, money from BEP anymore. Well, no, it's like, I've overused this analogy, but it's like, it would be akin to, okay, a tornado comes, blows the roof off my home, and the insurance sends me a check for $15,000 to fix it. And I come in the next day, and I'm talking to my employer, and I tell them about it, and they say, oh, great, we can reduce your salary now by $15,000. So it's you can't use it for recurring costs, right? So that was a concern. But so far we haven't seen that played out, although we were hearing that chatter. But I don't know if that was more about, hey, we think this is going to happen, or if it was more about, gee, we hope this doesn't happen.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I had a couple. This is very speculative, but I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on it. I'm not sure, because I haven't followed it real closely, but was there a bill being introduced, or someone was wanting to introduce, to change the date when the BEP is calculated? And I haven't followed it. So did that pass? How would that impact us if they changed the date?
That has been, but so I want to be careful how I say this, because I don't think that would be, I think the hold harmless provision would take care of that. Okay. So what we are hearing, and again, this is multiple conversations with Bob today down in Nashville. Mm-hmm. What we're hearing is that the state, essentially the hold harmless would do this. They would look at your current ADMs, and they would say, okay, your amount based on that for next year would be this. Then if that amount is less than what we got this year, they would defer to the higher amount. Okay. So yeah, we've seen that, but I think the hold harmless provision, if that goes through, would take care of that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Another question, and this is very speculative, but if we suffered a deep reduction in the number of students next year due to mandatory masking, how would that impact our schools and the BEP funding? Because what I'm hearing are a lot of parents that are looking at alternatives like homeschool and private schooling. So how would I mean, and it may not come to pass, but would a deep reduction in the number of our students impact our BEP, or would hold harmless take care of that too?
Hold harmless should take care of that for next year. In subsequent years, it would remain to be seen. One of the concerns too that we had is, what does hold harmless really mean? If hold harmless simply means you're not going to get less than you got the year before, that could still be really difficult for us. And the reason is because we typically will have $6, $8, $10 million in increases of BEP each year. The reason I feel a little better though is, again, other districts across the state are experiencing the same dynamics that we are, less numbers of students. The state has increased the BEP pool because they've increased that instructional salary component by 4%. So there's more money to go around, right? And if there's more money to go around, but yet we're still proportionally in a similar ranking than we were before COVID ever hit and before the students started going away, I feel a little better about that. So we always try to pull numbers out of from the state to try to get them to show their cards, before April hits, because, we're drafting a budget, and we never have any luck, but we always try to do that. But then they'll send us maybe subtle messages. We have some pretty good contacts down there. So anyway, we're keeping our fingers crossed. We feel pretty good about it. I'm not, again, I don't want to be overly optimistic, but by the same token, I'm not really panicked right now.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, you had a moonwalk. All right, so next time, got you. All right, perfect. So next we'll move on to our agenda item number 4, recruitment and retention of minority educators by Scott Bolton. Before he starts, I just kind of want to preference this. For me as a board member, this is one of my biggest priorities coming onto the board, is to really increase the number of minority teachers that we have in Knox County schools, and ideally get it to a place that actually matches the number of minority students that we have in Knox County schools. A qualified teacher is a qualified teacher, but there's a lot of data that shows the connection when it comes to culturally, how significantly the students achieve in that classroom when you're able to have a culture connection in the classroom. And it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. And so I appreciate Knox County Schools' effort when it comes to increasing this. We have a long way to go, and we have a long way to go within Knox County in itself. But I do believe just us having the conversation and us putting things in place drives us to the direction that we need to go to serve our kids. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and board members and commission members. Thank you for this opportunity. I've brought Adrian Rucker with me. He's our HR operations director, and he has spent the time taking up our recruiting efforts this year. It was a different year in the pandemic, and I'm gonna try to end close on time if I can, because he and I we're participating as panelists in the Diverse Leaders Network for the state. So we have to go to our offices and participate remotely. So with that being said, let me kind of jump into to talk about, let me see if this will work. Terry, I may have to borrow your, hey, there we go. I don't think it's going to do it, is it? Technology is one. There we go. So my discussions items I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about the current metrics of Knox County Schools. I want to look at some of the issues, maybe some of the things that we see on the forefront in terms of our recruiting and retention of minority educators. Look at some of those issues. I want to go over some of the action items that we've taken, and then kind of end a little bit on next step with some questions. So, Terry, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Let's look at our metrics. So if we look at actually the strategic plan and the strategic metrics that were provided back as a result of the school year 17-18 metrics, we had roughly about 4.7 educators of color in Knox County schools. We have increased that this year. We're up to 6.1% in educators of color. Now, let me kind of put that in perspective. Putting that in perspective, that is a total of 283 educators of color out of 4,643 total educators in the district. So if we want to have that goal, and ultimately that is our goal as you know, educators, and as Ms. Satterfield said, to have demographics that match that of our student population. If we look at that, right now we have about 32.2 students of color. So in order for our educators of color metrics to match that of our students of color metrics, we've got a long way to go. It's approximately, our number needs to be about 1,495 educators of color. So here's some of the issues that we have in getting to that. Is this something that we can get to in 1 year? Be virtually impossible. Is this something that we can get to in 5 years? Be very difficult. In 10 years, it's plausible. It's possible. And so what we need to look at is we need to look at how we can address these issues in a long-term manner, in a systematic manner, so that we can get there. Ultimately, our goal is to have, and we believe having the most effective educators in front of students is the best thing that we can do for the students of Knox County Schools. Period. That's it. What we want to do is we want to have those opportunities for educators of color. So, okay. So here's one of the things, and this is a positive, but it's also a negative when we're looking at trying to increase the diversity in Knox County Schools. We at Knox County Schools actually have a very low attrition rate in terms of our educators. Now, a lot of times you will see in organizational health inventories, a lot of things that they'll talk about is attrition rate is indicative of poor, poor occupational health or poor things like that. Our attrition rate is about 7.1% on average. When you're looking at basically the national average, I pulled a chart, it's about 11% for public schools, educators in public schools. We're significantly below that. So typically, we hire around 314 educators each year. Now remember that 285 number that we've got to get to 1,495, but we're only hiring on average about 314. You got a numbers issue in terms of trying to really move that needle in a short span of time. So that's something that we're aware of, and I think that's something that we're trying to manage, but it's something that we have to also keep in the forefront as we're looking forward into making these changes. So, it's imperative that we kind of are cognizant of that, because we don't want to put numbers out there in terms of goals that are completely unreachable. Because then when you're looking at something that you can't reach, it does become, it can have the opposite effect when you're trying to make gains in an organization. Care to advance to the next one there, Terry? Another thing that we see is lack of diversity in our educator prep programs. So right here, Terry, do you care to click on that top hyperlink right there? This is the 3-year cohort across the state of Tennessee. Now you can talk basically across the entire state of Tennessee, we're seeing less teachers being produced. I mean, that's that, and that is the same thing that's going on in the nation. And so maybe it might work. Some problems. Let me just say this. If we're looking at across the state, we're seeing we're not seeing metrics. If you scroll, thank you. You scroll down just a little bit, there's there we go, cohort by members by race right there, Justin, up just a little bit. Up just a little more. So okay, right there. These are this is the 3-year cohort of all of the educators that were produced inside of the state of Tennessee, and it's laid out by their demographics. Now remember, if we're looking at our educators of color, our educated color in Knox County Schools is around 33%, 32-point-something%. All of the educators that were produced in the state of Tennessee was only 16% educators of color. So we've got a supply issue. We've got a significant supply issue. Now, we could also look at our local or regional educator prep programs, and I've got some, and I'll be happy to supply this so that you can look at it. I don't think it's going to be difficult to bounce and toggle back and forth. But when you're looking at that 16% there at the statewide, when you're looking at our primary players that we receive our teachers from, we're looking at an average of about 5% or less educators of color produced. So that would be University of Tennessee, Knoxville. We are a primary partner for that. And when I say that word primary partner, that means that we sit at the table with them, and we have the opportunity to shape the program. And we're able to push in and lean in. And so we have had some tough conversations about what their intentions are going to be in terms of recruiting a diverse workforce for us in the field of education. So we are a primary partner with LMU. It's the same thing, the same percentages. And also with Johnson University. And those are our three institutions that we're primary partners. We also look regional, other schools that we have partnerships with, and the same thing there. You're looking at 5% or less educators of color that are being produced at our local EPPs that are supplying, are being the supplies for our classroom. And so we realize that being an issue. Terry, I hate to ask, can you go back to that PowerPoint? And I'll be happy to share this with you so you can see the links. That is the Educator Preparation Program report card on the state site. So there's a lot of things that you can look at with those hyperlinks. And so, again, those are the hyperlinks so that you can look specifically at their metrics. And let's go ahead and go to the next page there, Terry. So what have we done, or what are we going to do? The board, a few months ago, approved a position that was cut as a result of funding during COVID when we were concerned about the revenue that we would receive, which was a Director of Diversity Investment position in the HR department. We are expected to hire that position sometime in the summer. So that's a big thing that we're looking at in terms of action items for us. Last year, one of the things that I was happy that the state board listened to our concerns. There was an issue with out-of-state licensure, and this was an ongoing issue with out-of-state licensure. For example, if I'm in Georgia and I complete an educator prep program in Georgia, this was pre-2020. If I completed an educator prep program in Georgia, I had to meet all of the initial requirements as a teacher that graduated from a Tennessee EPP before I could be granted a license in the state of Tennessee. It's a huge deterrent. We're talking about, $1,000 to $1,200 when we're trying to offer a job to somebody, and then we're also asking them to relocate to Knoxville. So when we go to, maybe we're going to recruit a historically black college or university that's out of state. That's a big, huge stumbling block to try to bring them back to Knoxville, to say, hey, you're going to have to spend, your relocation costs, you're going to have to spend, your cost to achieve your certification, and then we'll give you a conditional offer based on the fact that you pass the praxis and do this, this, and this. It was ludicrous. So we leaned in and talked to our local state board reps to make a change, to make a provision to that. They passed it in first reading without an issue. The second reading, it got held up. And then so we continued to push in on that. And when the COVID package was released in April, it slid through without an issue, and they granted that so that an out-of-state licensed teacher could come in on initial licensure, and they've got 3 years to get all of their licensing in place so that they could be granted a Tennessee practitioner license. So we have addressed that issue, and that's something that we have done because that was a big, huge, again, pitfall when we're trying to attract, educators of color from outside of the state of Tennessee, because you saw the demographics when we're looking at what's being produced in the state of Tennessee. There's just not a lot of production when it comes to educators of color. So another thing that we have done is we have attended teacher fairs. Now, it's been really odd in the year of pandemics, the pandemic. And Adrian has been extremely busy, and along with some of our other folks in the office, attending these virtual fairs. And that actually has worked out pretty well for us in terms of trying to get interest in Knox County schools. And so we have been doing that, and we will continue to do that. As a matter of fact, I think we've got a couple that's upcoming. So another thing that we did was we focused on the partnerships that we have and the connections that we have with historically black colleges and universities, along with universities that are Hispanic serving institutions, and trying to make connections with those. Now, we may not have partnership agreements, we may not have, but we are participating in their recruitment fairs. We are participating in trying to make contacts with those places just so that we can start the process of recruiting some educators of color from those places. And then this year, what was interesting was we had our first KCS virtual fair, and it was really a success. There was a lot of prayers that went into that because, technology is wonderful, especially when it works. And so we were hopeful that it worked, and it worked really well for us. And I'm happy to report that we have actually hired a number of teachers from the West Coast. We had a lot of teachers that were attending their teacher fair, and they were sitting in their living room in Washington. And so we had a lot of principals reported back to us that, hey, I've got this great person. They were an educator in California, and you know what? They spent all of last year without a paycheck. And they are so excited that we're providing education in person this year. And so that has been something that has actually attracted a lot of people to come to Knox County schools. And so we wear that kind of as a feather in our hat in terms of what we've done with our recruitment efforts. Care to advance that next slide there? So the thing that I am really proud about, because again, it's evident that in the state of Tennessee, we are not producing, our educator prep programs are not producing educators of color. So we entered into an agreement with the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Again, they're our primary partner, and we can push in with expectations, and we can push in together about some additional partnerships that we can have to bring light to that. So in June of this last year, we formalized in our MOU this Grow Your Own partnership with UTK, and it was a 3-phase program. And phase 1 kind of hinged on the fact that at the time, the University of Tennessee, Knoxville was a 5-year program to be certified. You had 4 years, basically undergraduate studies. You have a full year of internship. And Dr. Brooke Denard Rosser, who was our Director of Diversity and Advancement, did some study particularly and found out that that was actually a deterrent to educators of color, because what you're seeing is if socioeconomic status has an impact on it, it is impossible for a person to go a year without a livable wage while they completed their internship. So to address that issue in phase 1 of this Grow Your Own program, we said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to typically we have about 25 teacher assistant positions that are very difficult for us to fill. They're typically in the area of special ed. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these folks that actually are going to be dual certified. They're going to be dual certified in special ed and dual certified in regular ed. And what we're going to do is we're going to repurpose those 25 positions. And we're going to call those aspiring teacher positions. And UT was flexible on the requirements for that internship so that we were able to provide a livable wage for those interns over the course of their year-long internship. We did that for 11 candidates this year. And we'll be hiring those hopefully pretty soon and bringing them into a classroom as teachers of record. So that was what we did in phase 1. What was beautiful about it is that's a budget neutral expense. It also creates an issue where we were having difficulty filling those positions anyway. So now we're filling the position, it's a budget neutral move, and we're providing a livable wage with benefits and a jump start on retirement for these folks who are going through this process. So that was phase 1. Phase 2 was providing an opportunity for our current educational assistants to achieve licensure. So that was phase 2. Phase 2, what was nice, we actually wrote letters of support. Well, we didn't write letters of support, but Mr. Thomas signed letters of support for 2 institutions for a federal grant, and for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and also for LMU. Both of those received $100,000 to offset the tuition costs for some of those folks, some of our educational assistants, with the emphasis being that these are educational assistants of color. Again, we're trying to do everything that we can to create that pipeline so that we can bring, those highly effective educators into our program. Now, the third phase, which is still in production, we're hoping to start that this school year, is what I've called our Volunteach program. Carry advance to the next stage there. There we go. So in our Volunteach program, basically what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the Flagship Scholarship. Now, if you're not familiar with the Flagship Scholarship, but any graduate that graduates from Austin East, that graduates from Fulton and Central, and goes to the University of Tennessee as a freshman, free of charge. So we're trying to capitalize that. Again, it's a budget-neutral position, but we're trying to capitalize on that. And so those folks at those schools, what we're going to do is we're going to look at teaching as a profession a program or a support system in that particular school. And basically what that program is going to do, it's going to leverage access to the UTK professors, to the UTK facilities, so that when you're a junior in high school, you can go campus and get instruction, support, access to the library, and a lot of those things as if you were a University of Tennessee Knoxville student, but you're a junior in college. So another thing that we're going to do is those classes, what we're looking at now is what's existing in the catalog is a TAP 1 and TAP 2 program, but a TAP 1 class, which will allow college credit to offset one of the requirements in the school. It is an EPSO, so that it would be an early grad, one of the things that we're looking at. But it also guarantees a foot in the door for the program so that we can at least excite people about education when it comes to that. Also, another thing that we're doing is leveraging the existing articulation agreement that exists between the University of Tennessee Knoxville and Pellissippi State for access to college classes to compress the time towards a degree that it would take for these people, for these students. So that, hey, what we're going to do is see what kind of support that we can provide, how can we help, assist in terms of mentorships, in terms of things like that, to really focus that attention so that we can work through this process of getting those people into the College of Education, the University of Tennessee, and into our classrooms in a compressed amount of time. And so once those folks go into that classroom, they're going to have opportunities to go into our Aspiring Teachers program, which would be the phase 1, so that they can have an expedited opportunity to have a livable wage while they're going through the process of achieving licensure. So we've tried to, that's kind of everything that I have, that our department has looked at in terms of where we are in the recruitment and the retention of our minority educators. So I want to leave time if y'all have any questions for myself or for Adrian.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Thank you for a thorough presentation. I really appreciate that. Terry, if we can go back one more slide. So phase 2 for me is a critical phase, and I think that if I had all the decision making, which I don't, but if I did, I would invest heavily in phase 2 because when I think about our teacher aides that are already in our schools, they know the kids, they know the system, they've been there forever. It's just a matter of the resources to not go back to being able to go back to school, or even the time to go back to school. And so they've committed themselves to working in our school system. So creating avenues from Knox County schools to offer, you've been teaching in our schools for 5-6 years. We want to give you this opportunity. So what barriers do you see that exists right now from the program that we have right now? And what do you think it will take for us as a school system to heavily invest in phase 2? And lastly, I support phase 2 even more because when we think about putting resources in recruiting from outside of the state, you're going to struggle with, do minority people want to come and live in Knoxville? And so we might get them for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but will they stay to where TAs are here and invested and committed to this community? So my question is, what barriers have we seen for phase 2 right now, and what would that investment look like from Knox County Schools and the County Commission?
No, that's a great question. The first thing that we're seeing, the most expeditious way to go from a TA to a licensed teacher is if you have an undergraduate degree. So that was kind of the low-hanging fruit that we focused on. A lot of those $100,000 scholarships were basically began with those folks who met that criteria. The part that we really need to focus on expansion are those opportunities for those people who maybe have an associate's degree or lack a bachelor's degree. And so those are going to be some areas where we're going to have to look at to invest some resources, some structure, because right now we just don't have it. So that's going to be what's nice about this Grow Your Own program is that it is kind of bare bones, but it has plenty of room for growth. So if we really want to step into phase 2 and say, okay, several years ago, the state had a base 10 program that expedited it's kind of like a TA to a special ed teacher. And it was a great program. And so, if we can recreate that and have the means to do that, that would be certainly something that we would be interested in doing. And so what's nice about this is we have that opportunity for expansion. So we're always exploring those avenues to be able to do that.
Any other questions?
I've got a question. Can you all hear me?
Oh, hey, Daniel.
Where is he?
Daniel on the big screen?
We can hear you barely.
You can hear me barely?
Yeah, that's good. Speak loudly.
All right, I'm going to talk up. I'm going to yell in my house.
Go.
Yeah, Scott. So I really appreciated all the metrics and also appreciated the comment that you made related to setting realistic goals. I also know that, with the recent policy that the State Board of Education passed around diversity, one of the requirements in that is that local LEAs will have to set goals in this area. So has there already been some conversation in Knox County schools related to goals, setting some realistic goals?
Absolutely. I think when you look at when the strategic plan was originally created, a lot of there is a metric in that strategic plan that looks at the educators of color and the percentage. And if you look at those metrics, they're completely unachievable. They're impossible to achieve based on the way it steps out.
Well, and that plan formally is expiring soon. So.
That's right. So what we did is I worked with Steve Rudder and REA, and we looked at realistic goals. And so when that new plan is laid out with those metrics, those are going to be some realistic metrics that are going to push us, but that have the potential to be achieved. And another thing that as we talked about that is I think that what we want to do is we want to reevaluate those on an annual basis. We want to reestablish the baseline on an annual basis so that if we exceed our mark, we're still pushing towards a higher goal. If we fall short for whatever reason, we're still pushing toward a realistic goal.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it'd be good at some point for those metrics to live on some type of dashboard on our website that would probably have a host of other items too, related to diversity and inclusion, issues of equity that we've been highlighting through the strategic plan.
Absolutely.
I have a question. So are there any recruitment programs you're considering or looking into that would recruit professionals into teaching their craft as opposed to even, just starting them out? Because I'm speaking from my own experience where I had a different profession and then brought that to the classroom.
Absolutely. We're always looking for that. We actually have two pathways. Right now, with the way that the state licensure is like, for example, if you have a bachelor's degree in anything, then you could actually be granted a practitioner license so long as an EPP says you meet that criteria and you enroll in their program. So we have been, in a lot of our teacher fair, we don't just focus on those traditional folks that have come that pathway, but we've reached out to community members and the like. Another pathway is we have a partnership with Professionals Teach, which is like distinguished professionals that we will employ. They typically get an adjunct license, but we'll have people who are seasoned in their field, and maybe they're an engineer and they come into the classroom and teach 1 or 2 classes for us. But it is kind of an opportunity for them to get their foot in the door to see what it's like. And oftentimes, and sometimes we'll see those folks that will come over and to be a full-time teacher. We'll see that particularly in the health sciences. Health sciences is where we'll see that a lot. Of course, that's on an occupational track, but absolutely, we have looked into that pathway. Great point.
Are we doing anything to actively get out and recruit people like this? Or aside from them just saying, here's this program?
In terms of marketing, I don't think that we have really had a market impetus for that, and that is certainly something that we could go back and look and see if that's going to be something that might bear some fruit. I think one of the things what we want to have a good balance about that is we want to balance that, but we also, again, want the most effective teachers that can be in front of our students. And so while we recognize that as being the opportunity, that sometimes when it's a hard to staff position, that is something that we need, we also want to have a system around those folks so that as they are introduced to the profession, that it's something that they don't just say, I did that for a year and I'm gone. So that becomes a little more resource intense, but that's something that we have explored and we've used it quite a bit. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Scott, Daniel asked my question, kinda, but I tend to understand things numerically better than I do other ways. The gap, as you presented it, I think the number was 283 out of 1495, which was kind of where we wanted to be. Obviously, yeah, that gap wouldn't possibly be made up in 5 or 6 years. 10 would be even challenging. Yeah, it would be. Has there been any progress toward narrowing that up to now, or is that kind of where it's been for a while?
There has been slight. When we first started with the strategic plan, we were at 4.7. So currently we sit about 6.1%. So we have made a little bit of headway into that. Right. There was something that I failed to mention in terms of retention, but I think it's important to mention, in looking at the positive culture, as that's one of our priorities that's set by the board and by the superintendent. Mr. Thomas has done a great job of assembling advisory boards so that they have an audience with the superintendent. And so we have a teacher advisory board. We also have a minority advisory board, so that which is comprised of minority educators, so that they can actually have an audience with the superintendent to bring any kind of concerns, unimpeded before him and say, this is something and I think that what we're seeing is that's probably assisting the issue of attrition when we're talking about our educators of color. They recognize that as being an avenue where if they have a concern, they can reach out to a colleague, and that colleague could bring that concern directly to the superintendent.
Thank you.
Scott, just as a point of clarity, that 1.4% change, that happened over how many years?
That happened from, I think that was from if I'm not mistaken, is that from the 17, 18, or is that the 18? I think that was.
Okay, 17, 18. Yeah, okay, that's right.
17, 18 to present.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool. Any other questions? Thank you, Scott. And again, I do appreciate the work that is going into making this an effort. It is the region that we live in, and so the pot is the pot. But I do appreciate the effort and just continue to work towards the goal that we have to help our babies. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Moving right along. So we added an agenda item for Ms. Tanya Coates to come up, and so she will close us out today. So you are the piece between us and leaving, Tanya. So no, just playing. No pressure.
So I appreciate you all giving us the opportunity. So this is just a resource. I am Tanya Coates. I'm currently the president of the Knox County Education Association, but I serve in a dual capacity of being the vice president of the Tennessee Education Association. So what I gave you all is, I know that as we're getting ready to talk about budget concerns and where we stand, I'm going to explain this packet so you can utilize this at your convenience. So it is actually in your packet is in order, okay? In the order in which we want this information for you to be able to utilize it. Also, I want to have this disclaimer. We're never trying to impede on what you should do about it, but give you the arsenal and the resources to understand where we stand in regards to BEP funding and how we fund what's funded for Knox County schools, how we fund our students. So there are 8 packets, or what I call funding body pages, that are in this packet. And I only pulled out of the 140 school districts in Knox County, I only pulled out the largest 7. But there's an outlier in your packet, and I'm going to explain why. The second page in your packet is Oak Ridge City Schools. Now, I know we always talk about how are we to our neighboring districts. Well, we can't compare ourselves to Oak Ridge. We can't compare ourselves to Maryville City Schools because they don't have near the number of kids that we have or the capacity that we have. But when we think about the capacity that we do have, we are comparable to. The first page is Davidson County. Again, I just said that Oak Ridge is the second page. The third page is Williamson County. The fourth page is Shelby County Schools. The fifth page is Hamilton County Schools. The sixth page is Rutherford County Schools. Knox County is the 7th page that we have. And then the 8th one is Montgomery County Schools. So I'm just going to go over Davidson counties. And again, when you're having discussions about how we're funding our students, just remember the place where you just saw Knox County, where they were in this stack. Second from the bottom. It's disheartening to know that we do such an excellent job of educating our students here in Knox County schools, but we don't actually fund our students per pupil like we should. And it's not basically, I used to always believe, or at least as educators, we believe that duly it is the responsibility of the state that they should be funding us. But I'm going to explain just Davidson counties. And then you can look at Knox counties and you can compare these. So when you have a conversation next month or years, just know that this is where we stand and we are not moving up this line any closer based on what I'm going to explain about Davidson County. So Davidson County, as you can see, is that they spend per pupil is $12,280 per pupil spending. As you can see, they spent 72.9% comes out of their local monies and then 27.1%. Now Davidson County, you all know this all too well, that they are a metropolis of Country City, USA, right? They have the Music City, USA down there. Everything is in Nashville. Nashville is booming, and they can afford to do this. They've actually raised their taxes in the last couple of years. But this is, when you look at their top comparison on the top, they have $12,280. Of the BEP funding is $7,425. And of that money, it's broken up to 45% of it is provided by the state, and then 55% of it is funded by the local. When you look at the local funding above what BEP pays, they actually put in $4,855 more above what BEP sends to them, which equates to, on their local association, is 39.5%. When you look at the state average, they're at 27.1% above the state average. And again, they're at 72%. They pay 72%. Almost, we might as well say 73%, because it's 72.9 in their local spending for their. But if you look at the region and this state, they are well above the Southeast average of $10,214. When you look at the average state amount is $9,900, they are well above that. And then when you look at the average per student, what the state does is just $7,132. But if you want to spend this time today and make yourself feel a little bad, is what you go to that page that we have as Knox County, that we must do better. We have got to do better for our kids, and we can't say that it's the state, and we can't say it's local, and they can't say it's local. We have got to take an equal fight to help our kids to make sure that we're getting the resources that we need. Now, I have all 140 some of them, but again, I just wanted to make sure that you got this comparison of what's going on across the state as regards to BEP. Now, as Ron stated before, in many meetings before, BEP is complex. And nobody really wants to pinpoint and say that BEP is on the right formula. Or what you've always heard is BEP is fully funded. They fund us what they're wanting to give us. But they have billions of dollars in Nashville that they can actually make that those funds available for all of our kids across the state. Because $7,132 is just not enough to take care of kids. I will also forward all of you on, we did a comparison around BEP, what TEA did for us. We have a really good research team and a legal team that actually helps me out. But they said that when you look at our neighboring states, what they do for us, we are fourth from the bottom. And that, again, that is unacceptable for the state. But I'm concerned about Knox County, because when we say that we have done more with less, we are actually harming our future when we continue to do more with less, because we are straining our teachers and we're straining the minds of students. And then if we're going to ever combat our racial and social justice when we talk about inequities for kids, we have got to start investing in our students and in our schools, because we can't do this anymore. And that's what we want to, again, this is meant to give you an arsenal when you're talking about funding for the kids of Knox County School. We collectively just need to do better. And I appreciate your time.
Do we have any questions from Ms. Tanya Coates? Thank you, I appreciate you.
See, I kind of make you go home early. See?
No, I'm just playing. This is a great visual, thank you so much. All right, family, any questions, comments, concerns before we adjourn? You feel good? Yeah. Okay. Well, our next meeting is in May. Awesome. So I will see you all in May, and if there's anything we need to add to the agenda for then, just let me know. Meeting is adjourned at 4:58.